Hi. So I'm here today to talk about something that has been on my mind lately in the OPS community. And that has to do with the four functions that are not in our grant stack. And I know Dave and Shannon talk about how we don't really use those four functions, we simulate them instead. And I don't think that this is quite accurate. So, like, for my type, for example, ISTJ, SITE, FINE, that's my grant stack. But what about those other four functions? What about SC? What about NI, FE, TI? Are they saying that we don't ever use them at all? Because that is something that I have a very hard time wrapping my head around. Now, Dave and Shannon, they kind of get around this by saying, well, let's say you want to color and you don't have a green crayon. You could use a blue crayon and a yellow crayon, combine them to make green. So you're kind of simulating green, without actually having a green crayon. And then supposedly you could tie that into cognitive functions, acting like they're crayons. So, like, if you don't have FE in your stack, you could simulate it by saying combining FI and TI together. Now, I can understand that analogy. The analogy in itself makes sense, but does that really work in reality? I guess what Dave and Shannon aren't really answering is how exactly are those functions being simulated, if that is what's happening? And second, would a person that's observing you, would they be able to tell like a simulated function from the real function? Like somebody who actually had FE in their stack, would they look different than somebody who was simulating FE, like with FI and TI? Would they be any different? Now, I think I've read in some typology communities that, well, simulated functions would be slower because you'd have to go through the functions that you have in your stack first, to get to the simulated effect. So if I wanted to do FE, for example, I would have to go through FI and TE, and it would be slower. Maybe that's true, but I'm not saying that we don't ever simulate functions, um, because I do think that we compensate for functions that maybe don't come as easily to us and that aren't in our four function stack. Yeah, we might compensate for that through other functions, but I also think it's inaccurate to say we don't have these functions at all. We never use these functions. Or if we use those functions, they're used in a very primitive sense, which I don't think is accurate either. I mean, like on an everyday basis, I can think of several examples where I'm using those four functions not in my grant stack in the way Dave and Shannon are describing them. So, starting with SC, they say SC is gathering sensory data, gathering new experiences. Well, what about when I go out to eat and I decide, I'm going to try something different from the menu. I'm going to try a new food. Um I'm just going to travel to this new place I haven't been before and I'm going to take in all the scenery. Is that not gathering sensory? I'm doing that. Um or what about I'm reading something and I think it's important that I take in all the facts? Okay? Or what about NI? NI, when you're reducing something to a narrow down concept, like when I'm typing people or assessing their personality. Sometimes it's pretty tempting to put them in narrowed down categories. They could be OPS categories or some other system. Like this this is a type A personality. They're always rushed. They always got to accomplish things and be the best. And this one's a type B personality. They're just more relaxed and laid back and not very ambitious. And yeah, I do that. But I mean, I also realize that that can be kind of limiting, but it's not like I never do that at all. What about FE? The spectrum of people's values. Yeah, I pay attention to that. I know, for example, that when people are asked what their favorite color is, that popular answers are blue, red, and less so brown. Okay? Or that with the Star Wars movies, that the original trilogy tends to be held in higher regard than the prequels or those movies that follow the original trilogy. I'm aware of that. It's not that I don't ever pay attention or not notice those things. Or TI. And sometimes I just have my own way that I like to do things that works for me when I buy a product. Um, and I'm the only one using it. I'm not so concerned with other people's opinions. I want to know that it works for me. And sometimes I'll have my way of doing things or operating some thing that isn't quite the standard. It isn't quite what other people do, but it seems right to me. So, yeah, I'm certainly using those functions supposedly not in my grant stack. So, I think this is what I think a better understanding of what's going on with those other four functions. I think we still have a grant stack, and I think the grant stack is significant because it kind of shows us, where most of our psychological issues are, our motivations are, our strengths or our biggest challenges in our life. That's reflected in our grant stack. In that way, they're more differentiated. Like for me, my strongest are SI and TE. The bigger challenges in my life are going to revolve around FI and NE. That makes total sense. Okay. And also, I think it's correct to say that we prefer or tend to use one function axis over the other. Like I prefer SI-NE axis over the SE-NI axis the majority of the time. And the majority of the time, I will default to that. Or also the other axis, the judgment axis. So for me, that would be that the TE-FE axis. I'm there most of the time, but it's not like I never ever go to the FETI axis. So Harry Merle runs a YouTube channel called Cognitive Personality Theory. And he's got this idea that we can kind of dip into those other functions that are normally not in our stack. So we might have like a baseline, for example. So like for me, my baseline is like the SI NE axis. I'm there the majority of the time, but sometimes I will dip down into the other axis where I'll start using SE and NI. Am I using them as frequently? Probably not. Do I tend to value them as much or put as much significance in the whole scheme of things into that axis? Probably not. But I'm still using them. And I'm using them in more than just a really primitive way. So that's my thought on it. Is I think we do use all 8 functions, but the most significant ones for us psychologically will be in our 4-function grant stack. So thanks for tuning in. If you want to hear more content from me, subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. Bye-bye.